חגיגה 25.
Good morning, it is Monday the 6th of July. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today, your daily update of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, another massive overnight Russian attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, with at least 8 people killed and dozens more injured. It comes just ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara this week, and just after the US President Donald Trump held separate calls with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. We'll be joined live here in the studio by Ukraine's ambassador to the European Union. And schools out for the summer. And as the holiday season gets underway across Europe, travel disruption is hitting airports. The EU's new digital system for checking non-EU travellers' documents is causing bottlenecks at border controls during one of the most busiest times of the years. European airlines are urging Brussels to suspend the checks for the next 2 months. Meanwhile, more than 20,000 protesters from unions, civil society groups and left-wing parties gathered in Erfurt, Germany this weekend in an attempt to prevent the far-right AfD delegates from attending their party's conference. Some staged sit-in blockades across the city and others clashed with riot police. We'll have an update from our correspondent. But first, Russia has launched another massive barrage on Kyiv, striking a residential area in the centre of the capital. The attack came just hours after President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Moscow was preparing a new large-scale strike timed to coincide with the US Independence Day and the NATO summit happening in Ankara. For more on this, we're joined now in the studio by the Ukrainian ambassador to the EU, Chentov. Good morning, Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Just fill us in on this latest attack that comes just ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara.
Yeah, Russia is sending its message that they want to continue this war, but definitely both Ukraine and our allies will send our message back, because war is going back to Russia, and Ukraine already has its answer, and we call it kinetic sanctions. But definitely, you mentioned NATO summit. It's a good opportunity to keep the unity and to send a strong message that Ukraine will have this support. And it's first of all about anti-ballistic missiles.
But when you see this attack last night, we saw a similar one last week, does Ukraine feel a little bit abandoned by your allies?
No, we don't feel abandoned. Definitely Russia is very aggressive, because probably they do not see that those attacks work, and we need definitely to keep pushing back.
And how will you respond?
As I said, with the Ukrainian kinetic sanctions, which means deep strikes, but definitely we need to continue pressure on Russia through the sanctions, through Ukrainian support. First of all, anti-ballistic missiles to protect Ukraine, but also to send to Ukraine all equipment, all ammunition, which Europe and other partners have to offer now.
Let's talk about EU enlargement. Some EU member states have been toying with this idea of associate membership, like the German Chancellor. How does Ukraine feel about this?
Look, let's not really concentrate on the title. Let's concentrate on substance. Because how we understand this idea, it's not only German suggestions of a number of member states and also European Commission, they started to think what to do between now, when we started this journey, and the final point when we joined the Union, what to do in between. And the idea is good because we need to deepen our partnership, we need to deepen economic cooperation, also institutional setup, because there were several ideas how to get Ukraine closer. And I think we just need to work together and to make sure that Ukraine already feels benefits of enlargement already on this stage.
And of course, you want to open the all 6 accession clusters as soon as possible. This is clearly not happening. What does a realistic timetable look like to you?
Look, we are ready to open even today all 6 clusters. Why? Because we spent a lot of time doing so-called front-loading, which means that we did all technical work necessary to open the clusters. Now it's pure for member states to give a green light. And as we heard, that it's already possible to open the 6th one, which is a foreign policy cluster. But we don't think that there is any reason to keep this process pending. So we need to move as fast as possible.
And this will be a big issue, of course, for the Irish rotating presidency that is now underway. We saw the special ceremony last week with, of course, President Zelensky in Dublin. Ireland says it will be an honest broker, but it's also under pressure over alumina exports to Russia. So what is your hope for the next set of sanctions that Ireland as well will have to be in control of?
But definitely, I know that there is a political will to fix this issue. There are legal issues as well. But Ireland is a good partner, good, strong partner, now incoming already EU presidency. So my hope is that we are going to fix it fast.
OK, we'll have to keep an eye on that and keep an eye on the Irish government. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming into us today and being our guest on Europe Today. And as you heard there, EU enlargement very much high on the Brussels agenda this summer. After the recent EU Western Balkans summit in Montenegro, the European Commission is now working on a plan to reform the enlargement process and have its own say, aiming to regain control over a debate now largely shaped by EU member states. That's according to an exclusive story broke on Euronews this morning by our very own Luca Bertuccia, who joins me now here in the studio. Good morning, Luca. Great to have you with us. Just tell us more about this story that you broke this morning.
Yeah, indeed. We see enlargement is a very hot topic right now, with countries like Montenegro and Albania next in the line to join the bloc. Ukraine has made the topic a very geopolitical issue right now. And in the past few weeks, EU countries have advanced a series of proposals to reform the accession process. A key proposal is to strengthen safeguards to avoid that new members breach democratic standards and the rule of law, which is basically a lesson EU capitals say they have learned from Viktor Orban's Hungary. We have also seen proposals from France and Germany about a potential gradual integration of EU countries to show early benefits before you fully join the bloc. And finally, we have heard from the Germans about this idea of associated membership for Ukraine, which would introduce security guarantees before Ukraine fully joins the bloc.
So that's what the member states think. What about the Commission? How are they trying to weigh in now?
Indeed, the Commission has sort of lost the initiative, and now they're trying to regain it before EU leaders discuss this very sensitive topic at the European Council in October. Plans are currently being discussed at the highest political level, and we are going to see them probably before the October summit. So since last year, the Commission is due to present the pre-enlargement policy reviews, which is basically a blueprint for how the EU members would work with 30-plus member states. So this is a very sensitive conversation to have, since it would redistribute money and power within the bloc. And it's probably too early to have this conversation, especially with the French presidential election coming up next year. So instead, the Commission is likely to focus on democratic safeguards to avoid that the burden falls all on Montenegro.
Well, Montenegro, of course, they aspire to be the next country to join as early as next year. What does this all mean for them?
Well, it basically means that they risk to become the testing ground for these new rules, and that is precisely what the Commission wants to avoid, since it would mean punishing your best-in-class student. So safeguards, in fact, already exist in the accession process. Croatia, when it joined in 2013, faced post-accession monitoring for breaches of the judiciary and the rule of law, but there are countries that want to go much further, proposing swift sanctions for breaches of democratic standards, including the suspension of EU funding and even voting rights. These proposals are, however, very controversial because they touch a core EU principle, which is the equality of member states. So this discussion is still in the early stages, but it will shape not only the next wave of enlargement, but also how the EU will look like in the future.
It's a fascinating discussion. It's worth pointing out to our viewers that there has been no EU enlargement since 2013. Luca Bertucci, thank you so much for joining us, and we, of course, can read more of his article there on euronews.com. But now we can move on to Germany, where thousands of people spent their weekend protesting against Germany's far-right AfD party as they held their annual conference in the city of Erfurt. For more, we can head straight over to Berlin and bring in our correspondent, Sonia Isel. Good morning, Sonia. Great to have you with us on the programme. Just bring us up to speed on what actually happened at the conference.
Good morning, Maeve. Well, this weekend it was all eyes on the far-right AfD conference party. They are right now what seem to be the rising power in Germany, and the focus of this party conference was mainly the personnel. Alice Weidel and Tino Kruppalla, they have both been re-elected as party leaders, which is no surprise, but we did have some changes, and if we look at them, we can see that the AfD wants two things. One being they want to become younger, and the second being that they want to move more to the right. Now, if we look at the whole conference itself, it was very surprisingly calm. There were no internal fights. There was no discussions, which is very uncommon. This is due to the fact that because of the upcoming elections, the AfD wants to seem more professional, and they want to normalize themselves.
And tell us more about the protests. We're reading 20,000, 30,000 people spent their weekend trying to stop the actual conference from taking place.
Well, these protests, they were actually much calmer than expected as well. Around 60,000 people were expected. In the end, around 31,000 showed up. But we did have some severe clashes. There was one specific case where a media representative was hunted down and beaten by radical leftists. 28 police officers were injured. Now, in total, though, the police, they did a very positive conclusion. They said it was mostly peaceful, and by Sunday morning, most of the protesters were already gone, and by Monday morning now, everything is going back to normal in Erfurt.
OK, Sonia Isel in Berlin. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday morning here on Europe Today. And as you heard earlier in the programme, leaders of the NATO member states will be expected later this week in Ankara for a major summit. It's the first Turkey will host in 22 years. For more on what to watch out for, here's our Jakub Janis.
This Tuesday, NATO leaders land in Ankara for an annual summit. And it is a big thing, as they will try to map out the future of Western defense. The pre-negotiated statement promises an ironclad 32-member family committed to collective protection. But the official documents are not always reflecting the reality. Last Thursday, Donald Trump blasted again his allies on Truth Social, saying that Europe abandoned the US with its Iran war. And it is ridiculous for Washington to keep up its one-sided relationship with NATO. It is a bold statement, so let's look at the raw numbers to see if its most powerful member is right about it. Reports show a massive 20% surge year-on-year in core defense spending across Europe and Canada. In plain English, the Allies injected an extra $258 billion into the ports over the last 2 years. And NATO Secretary General points out that allies have spent $1 trillion on defense since Trump's first administration. He even calls it the Trump trillion to flatter the White House, while demanding it turns into combat-ready capabilities. Finally, NATO members even pledged to hit a massive 5% GDP defense target by 2035 to build a revamped NATO 3.0. But here is a problem. This move does not change the cold reality on the ground, even if a big chunk of that cash flows straight back to US defense firms. Washington is shrinking its wartime resource pool and withholding long-range bombers, fighter jets, submarines and warships from European commands. But the absolute leverage comes down to artificial intelligence. The US controls the monopoly on next-generation military AI models like Claude Mythos, and Washington treats this software as a tactical weapon, enforcing strict export bans. So Trump decides which ally receives digital protection and which country gets left behind. So it seems like buying $1 trillion ticket does not buy a permanent American protection. Europe is paying the bill for this alliance, but Washington still holds the keys.
And now it's time for our World Cup update. Well, Norway are into the quarterfinals of the World Cup for the very first time in history, knocking out Brazil. And great news for English supporters who are also through after a rather dramatic win against Mexico. And meanwhile, tonight at 9, the much anticipated clash between Spain and Portugal, fighting for their space in the quarterfinals. For more on the feeling on the ground ahead of those games, we can head now straight to our correspondents in both Lisbon and Madrid, João Azevedo and Cristina Tiquiar. Good morning. First to Lisbon, João. What is the mood there ahead of this big match?
Hey there, Maeve. Good morning. I'm standing here at this marina in the Lisbon area by the Atlantic, which has hosted several watch parties throughout this World Cup. It's already 25 degrees this morning, but temperatures are expected to be even higher later on, not least because this place will be crawling with Portuguese supporters eager to see the national team make it through to the quarter-finals. The task ahead, anything but easy, as Spain remains unbeaten in the tournament. The Spanish side is known for bossing possession, but it's worth noting that the Portuguese midfielders have the technical skills to prevent the Spaniards from dictating the tempo. That might well be the defining dynamic going into this knockout tie. Also, Cristiano Ronaldo announced yesterday that this will be his last World Cup. Will he start against Spain? Well, Gonçalo Ramos scored a stoppage time winner against Croatia when Ronaldo had already been subbed off. All of that, of course, increasing pressure on manager Roberto Martinez, who hinted, though, in his presser that he will not bench the captain. Whichever decisions are made, Portugal's not taking the back seat here. The Portuguese players making it absolutely clear that they're ready to go toe-to-toe with the reigning European champions. Now, let's get the perspective from the other side. Good morning to you, Cristina. You're in Madrid, not too far from here. What's the mood like in the Spanish capital?
Good morning. Well, here in Spain, there is a lot of excitement and optimism before tonight's encounter. Spain has some unfinished business with Portugal after last year's Nations League final, where Portugal won after a penalty shootout. So the team is excited. They have come into this encounter with a lot of energy. However, the players have been very careful not to underestimate Portugal. Forward Mikel Oyarzabal summed it up perfectly when he said that Spain is approaching this match with respect, but without fear. Spain really do believe that they are worthy and able to reach the quarterfinals at this World Cup. Now, tonight, all eyes are going to be on Lamine Yamal, one of Spain's top star players. However, many fans have noted that this year there is less focus on individual stars and more focus on the collective team effort, which is what has ensured Spain's success at this World Cup so far. But everyone knows that in a match like this against Portugal, any small mistake could mean a defeat. So optimism but caution from the Spanish side tonight.
Optimism but caution. Cristina Tiquiar and João Azevedo, thank you so much for that update. We'll be keeping, of course, a very close eye on that match. And also, coming up tonight at 2 a.m, the Belgian Red Devils take on host nation, the US. But in a controversial decision just ahead of the game, FIFA has suspended the ban on their top US striker, Folarin Balogun, who received a red card in the previous match against Bosnia and Herzegovina. According to reports, it was actually President Donald Trump himself who called the FIFA president to ensure that the top US striker could play. The Belgian Federation is looking into what action it can take after a decision critics say was influenced by politics. But that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, you can reach out to us at europetoday@euronews.com. But in the meantime, have a great day and see you soon on Euronews.
Embark on a tour of the European Union with Smart Regions to discover flagship